he's probably okay. And the "I've never used one before" there was very cute. There's just nothing quite like the effortless whimsy of cop procedurals made before 2020. Police brutality, how could it be? She's literally just a girl. But tasers are now ubiquitous in real life too. They're carried by some 400,000 American patrol officers, which is obviously great news for the company that makes them, Axon. You might not have heard of Axon before, which is surprising given how huge they are. The company has a market cap of over $40 billion, and they're constantly innovating in the taser space. Here is a pretty slick commercial for their latest model. Wow. That's a pretty intense ad for what basically looks like a cheap toy that comes with a strip mall security guard costume from Spirit Halloween, set to music from Now That's What I Call Hans Zimmer falling asleep on his synthesizer. Axon's stated mission is to protect life, as according to the company, tasers have been deployed more than 3.7 million times and have prevented loss of life or serious injury in more than 200,000 instances. In fact, to listen to Axon's co-founder and CEO, Rick Smith, yassified Bert, tell it, the taser is essentially a miracle weapon.
The idea of using electricity to incapacitate at its core is frankly a beautiful and simplistic idea that rather than causing death or injury to someone, if we can just temporarily take away control of their body and get them under control, it's about as non-violent as you could get.
Right, though I'm not sure I'd describe getting shocked with 50,000 volts as non-violent as you can get. It certainly doesn't sound that relaxing. There's a reason people unwind by taking a bath with lit candles or a book instead of with a toaster. But as deep down you probably already know, the reality of tasers just isn't that simple. Over the years, there have been multiple high-profile instances of people dying after getting tased, and according to a 2017 investigation, there have been over 1,000 incidents in the US in which people died after police stunned them with tasers. And look, it's impossible to know for sure what specific role tasers may have played in all of those deaths, but as you're about to see, that's in part because Axon's worked incredibly hard to ensure that's the case. So given that, tonight, let's talk about tasers, specifically the company that makes them, whether their product is as safe and effective as they claim, and the broader impact they've had on policing. And let's start with the fact the taser was first invented in the 1970s. Here is a newscast explaining it for the first time with one hell of a demonstration.
The taser looks like a flashlight, fires 2 electric darts, and packs 50,000 volts at low amperage. In this demonstration, conducted in a hospital for safety's sake, the volunteer victim is the son of the taser's inventor, Jack Cover. As it hits, the electrical charge paralyzes the central nervous system for a few minutes, and the victim loses control of his muscles.
Yeah, the inventor of the taser tested it on his own son. And that was on the news, and not somehow a clip from the 70s TV show America's Grainiest Home Videos of Parental Abuse. Initially, the product didn't really take off, mostly because it was too cumbersome and ineffectual to use. Then, in the early 90s, a 23-year-old Rick Smith learned about the invention, and he and his brother bought the rights, starting a company that at that point they called Taser. They spent years tinkering with its designing, including, crucially, swapping out the gunpowder that fired the darts in the original version for compressed nitrogen, which conveniently meant it suddenly was no longer subject to firearms regulations. By the late 1990s, they were marketing tasers to law enforcement with the promise that they were both incapacitating and extremely safe. Smith himself even took a half-second shock at a demonstration in Los Angeles to show his faith in it. And by the end of 2003, more than 4,300 police agencies had tasers. And at the time, they got a lot of positive coverage.
Across the country, cops called this taser the revolution.
May I ask what you think of that?
I love it. It stops officers from having to go hands-on and fight with suspects.
Sergeant Laurie Williams says the taser reduces deadly force because police no longer draw their guns on suspects with bricks or knives.
Why the growing use of this weapon?
The Miami Police Department has set a record for big city police departments in that for the last 16 months, we have not discharged a single bullet at a citizen.
OK, it is both impressive they went 16 months without a single police shooting, and also depressing that it's that impressive. Although, for the record, I'm not sure tasers can take all the credit there. The more relevant fact may be that at that time, the DOJ was conducting an investigation of the Miami Police Department for use of excessive force, and once it concluded, you'll never guess, police shootings rose right back up. So tasers can probably take as much credit for stopping Miami police shootings in 2004 as the release of Shrek 2. I don't know. Maybe the Miami PD were too busy going back to the theatre multiple times to absorb the nuances of Shrek's hero's journey and/or trying to figure out how these two actually fucked. Still, there was undeniably real enthusiasm for Tasers back then, and as they pushed into new lines of business, Taser rebranded as Axon and started selling technology like police body cams, a market they now dominate. If you ever see body cam footage on the news, you'll probably notice the word Axon in the corner. They're basically the TMZ of state-sanctioned violence. And all of this has made Smith incredibly rich. As of last year, he's worth $2.5 billion. And while this isn't strictly relevant, he's done that while creating a corporate culture that is borderline cult-like. Because not only has he been tased at least 7 times, voluntarily getting shot with tasers is kind of a rite of passage at Axon. Staff tasings, known as exposures, are corporate rituals and are often used to initiate interns or new recruits. Employees have even made up their own slang for it, ride the lightning, which sounds more like what you do after Pikachu shows you whole. On Axon's website, you can even see fun videos of employees getting tased in the office or at corporate events, and some have even roped in family members to do it with them.
Yeah, so fun fact, my mom and I did an exposure together, and I asked her to do it with me, and she did. So now we have the distinction of being the only mother-daughter duo in Axon Taser history to take a hit from an X2 together.
Oh, that's cute. Now, please do both try and go to therapy. Mothers and daughters are literally more likely to get tased together than heal matrilineal trauma. Also, if any men are wondering how you're supposed to react to a story like that, I'll tell you how, like her co-worker here. Stay frozen, King. This is not your story. This is not your fight. Axon's execs have also reportedly urged staff to make things permanent by getting tattoos of the company logo. In fact, here's Rick Smith with one. I'm sorry, but that is just an objectively shitty logo to have tattooed on your body. It looks like a Spy Kids watch celebrating its first year of sobriety. Now, Axon insists that no employee is ever pressured to get tased or tattooed, which is a hell of a thing to have to insist. But Smith does love engaging in big displays at corporate events, attending one as Taser Man in this deeply ill-advised superhero costume. And at another, he told the company's origin story while appearing remotely in what, I'm going to warn you, is the dumbest possible way.
Today, I want to tell you a story. It's our story of the roots of Taser and Axon, of how we came to be. In December 1990, 2 of my high school friends were shot and killed only a few miles from me, in what started as an altercation at a red light. They were in their early 20s, barely beginning to figure out life. And in the blink of an eye, 3 lives were destroyed. I found it absurd that the self-defense choice in the 20th century was still a bullet, the same tool we've used to kill each other for centuries.
OK, first, to get the obvious out of the way, that monstrosity is what Rick calls his avatar. And sure, he could have just zoomed in. That was 2022. After all, we all knew how to do that by then. But instead, he paid a man in a jacket to make random arm movements while wearing a bike helmet with an iPad projecting his face. He looks like a member of Daft Punk trying to sell you a timeshare. But that aside, the tragic origin story Smith's selling there is one he likes to tell a lot. He's mentioned it in interviews, at other events, and even in an SEC filing where he wrote, I had 2 friends who were shot and killed. I was enraged that such a terrible thing could happen, and I wanted to do something about it. And that would be a genuinely noble reason to focus on non-violence. But the thing is, while those young men were sadly killed, when reporters looked into it, they found, according to multiple family members, Smith was not friends with the deceased. He did go to the same high school, but it was not at the same time, according to school yearbooks. And while Smith insists he knew them through social events, one of their best friends later told a reporter, I don't know any Rick Smith. All of which puts a bit of a damper on Rick's origin story. Imagine finding out Bruce Wayne's parents weren't even murdered. It kind of makes this guy's whole deal even more confusing. Bruce, why are you doing this? Your parents are alive and well in Florida, but you never return their calls. They just won their pickleball semi-finals. There's a seat at the championship with your name on it, Bruce. Just pick up the phone. And that's not the only area where Smith and Axon's relationship to facts is shaky, because let's now talk about the 2 main selling points for tasers, that they're effective and that they're safe. And let's start with effective. In the past, Axon's claimed tasers are between 80 and 97% effective at subduing a suspect in the field. But one survey of police data found many departments disputed that, with one city claiming they were as effective as little as 55% of the time. Basically, a coin flip. And Axon's response was incredibly to complain that survey didn't give them credit for instances when a suspect was subdued after an officer merely displayed or threatened to fire a taser. But at that point, that's not really about their device, is it? You could presumably get that result with a gun, a flamethrower, or a magic fucking wand. And the thing is, if a taser doesn't work, police might then escalate up to a more violent option. Between 2015 and 2017, more than 250 fatal police shootings occurred after a taser failed to incapacitate a suspect. And in 106 of them, the suspect became more violent after receiving the electrical shock, which is understandable. Also, when we talk about tasers being effective, at what exactly? Because it's often less a taser being used instead of a more lethal option like a gun, and more a taser being used instead of a less lethal option like talking to someone. Cops have repeatedly been found to use tasers when they're in no imminent danger whatsoever, as a reflexive response to subdue anyone from unarmed, mentally disturbed or intoxicated individuals to suspects fleeing minor crime scenes to people simply arguing with police or failing to comply immediately with a command. In fact, remember that heartwarming story about Miami cops getting tasers and going 16 whole months without shooting a single person before starting again? Well, it turns out, in that time, they used those tasers a lot, because just a few months after that piece aired, CNN was airing stories like this.
About 1 week after learning from CNN that police tasered a 6-year-old boy in one of its elementary schools, the district said no more. In a letter sent to Miami-Dade's police chief, the school superintendent asked that police, quote, refrain from deploying tasers against elementary school students.
So that leads us to our last call question. Should police be able to use tasers on children?
That's it! A wild question to be asking. And also, that's basically what the news was like in 2004, debating the ethics of tasing 6-year-olds in between manufacturing consent for the Iraq War. And before you ask, someone absolutely did call in to answer that question, and yes, I am going to play you their response.
Yes. If the situation warranted, they should be allowed to use tasers. I wish I could have used one on my son.
Look, my instinct is still to disagree, but I do want to hear her side of the story. But it's true, cops have tased kids, and some see nothing wrong with that. In 2018, a cop in Cincinnati chased an 11-year-old who was shoplifting and then tased her, and this is how he tried to justify that to her afterwards.
Sweetheart, the last thing I want to do is tase you like that. When I say stop, you stop. You know you caught. Just stop. That hurt my heart to do that to you. Then I got to listen to all these idiots out here in the parking lot tell me how I was wrong for tasing you. You broke the law, and you fled as I tried to apprehend you.
OK, first, if you're tasing an 11-year-old at all, let alone for shoplifting, the idiot in the parking lot is very much you. And as for that hurt my heart, I do not feel bad for you, for the same reason I wouldn't feel bad for a kidnapper if their ransom note started with, this is really uncomfortable for me because I'm actually a people pleaser. So when it comes to the efficacy of tasers, it's complicated. If by effective you mean subdue suspects as little as half the time, increase the hostility of police encounters and give cops a quick and easy way to zap children without breaking a sweat, then sure, they absolutely work. But what about the other key question here, are they safe? Well, again, to hear Axon tell it, absolutely. When Rick Smith first started selling tasers, he told police that human and animal testing confirmed that it does not leave lasting harm. But the thing is, tasers are virtually unregulated by any agency. As one expert has said, there are not a lot of products that escape all safety agency regulation. It really is unusual. And what that means is you basically have to take the company's word for it. And honestly, when you look at some of Axon's initial tests, they're not that reassuring because their early animal and human tests didn't use control groups and consisted pretty much entirely of just tasing 1 pig, 5 dogs and some willing cops. Which honestly sounds less like a good sample size for a safety study and more like the original pitch for Paw Patrol. And look, no one wants to see any of those... Oh, gee! Oh, no! They're fine! They are probably fine. But even as tasers were rolling out around the country, some news outlets began noticing a worrying trend. One of the first to do that was CBS back in 2004, and they got a heated response from Rick Smith.
At least 40 people have died after being hit with stun guns. James Borden, shot 3 times, died while tussling with jailers in Indiana. David Glausensky died in his New York neighborhood just after being stunned. So did Willie Lomax of Las Vegas.
None of these cases has the person died while being hit with the taser. Of the cases that we've seen, we strongly believe, and our medical experts strongly believe, the taser had no causal effect in those fatalities. Had the taser not been used, all 40 of those people would still be dead today.
You're saying that this was a coincidence? They would have died anyway?
In every single case, these people would have died anyways.
Well, that is some amazing, completely unprovable bullshit. Sure, maybe all those people would have died anyway. Maybe Shinzo Abe's neck just did that. Who can ever truly know the mind of God? Hey, by the way, isn't it crazy that the former Prime Minister of Japan got assassinated 3 years ago and we literally never talk about it? I'm not peddling conspiracies, not suggesting anything sinister is afoot, just observing our cultural immunity to the relentless onslaught of horrors bobbing us along toward death, which will come for all of us one day, but crucially, as we all now know, not at the hands of a taser. That would be impossible. But pretty soon it became clear there actually were some safety issues with tasers because as tests inside and outside of the company became more rigorous, by the mid-2000s, multiple studies, including one commissioned by Axon themselves, found that tasers could disrupt the heart. Yet Axon's only real response to that came 3 years later after they lost their first court case when they began advising police against aiming at the chest. And when police departments became understandably concerned about that warning, Rick Smith tried to reassure them on a conference call that it really wasn't anything to worry about.
I want to start by addressing a couple of the questions we've been receiving over email. The first one is, are chest hits with the taser dangerous? And the answer to that is definitively no.
Oh, that's nice. Again and again in that call, Smith went out of his way to downplay the change in guidance, saying it was mainly for risk management, because in the event of a bad outcome, it saves us all the controversy. Basically, don't pay too much attention to the guidelines. They're just legal mumbo-jumbo. You know, kind of like how this is officially sold on Amazon as a wired, powerful, handheld electric back massager. The company's officially stating it should be used on your back. But you know what? Once it's in your hands, your body is your body, your journey is your journey. Go wild. And the thing is, over the years, Axon's put a lot of fine print onto their product about safe use. They suggest avoiding shooting the groin area and encourage splitting the belt line, meaning landing one dart on the upper half of the body and one on the lower, but not near the heart or groin. It also warns about the risks of using its products on people who are old, young, frail, agitated, exhausted, or suffering from an array of health conditions. And quick sidebar to anyone who doesn't fall into any of those 6 categories, let me say, as someone who falls into 5, go fuck yourself. And all of that helps to protect Axon from liability. It can say any death that occurs in one of those instances was from someone misusing their product. And at this point, I have to say, there is still a lack of scientific consensus on the exact risks of tasers, and the company's insisted its weapons are the most thoroughly studied and safest force option available, and that in its view, there are no confirmed cases of taser-induced cardiac arrest or electrocution. But it does say something, that when a voluntary tasing occurs on its own premises, where the company itself would presumably be liable, its employees are required to sign a waiver that warns of the potential for death at least 12 times. Which is both very telling and, frankly, seems like overkill for any waiver. The one we make our studio audience sign only warns about death 4 times. And it's mainly focused on the front row, stating they're OK with being in the splash zone.
Splash zone!
Maybe tonight's the night. Maybe you'll go get splashed. But there is one final twist to this story, where the harm Axon has done extends considerably outward, because a key component of their defence against liability is the use of a particular phrase that you might notice comes up an awful lot in coverage of people who've died after tasings.
The coroner's report says being tased, restrained, and stepped on did not kill Rios. Instead, he died from excited delirium.
Autopsy results show that Bolick died of acute exhaustion mania, which is also known as excited delirium syndrome.
The cause is excited delirium.
They labeled his cause of death excited delirium syndrome.
Excited delirium.
Excited delirium.
Her death was ruled an accident caused by a condition known as excited delirium.
Yeah, excited delirium, which I know already sounds like a wildly outdated medical term. It sounds like the second biggest reason people got cocaine from a pharmacy in the 1800s, right after I want some. Very basically, excited delirium means you're essentially out of control, and in that state, your heart can just stop of its own accord, regardless of what anyone else has done to you. Here is one of Axon's go-to medical experts trying to lay out the argument.
In excited delirium, you have an individual who's in a delirious state. He's not oriented to reality. He has hallucinations. He can't think straight. They describe as having superhuman strength. You can taser them, you can hit them, and it doesn't seem to bother them. They still keep going. And then they get into a struggle. And the longer they struggle, the worse it is and the greater probability that death will occur.
Wait, what? If someone dies during a struggle, it's probably because of the struggle, not because of an unrelated syndrome. There's a reason the San Francisco Chronicle ran headlines about the Zodiac Killer being at large and not people dying of spontaneous stab wound syndrome. Also, in unrelated news, some random guy sent us a super fun puzzle. And if that sounds like convenient horseshit, it's because it absolutely is. Professional medical associations have increasingly denounced the term excited delirium as at best useless and at worst racist pseudo-science. And yet, Axons aggressively push the term over the years because it's clearly very useful to them. But it's also become useful to police because they can now use it anytime they want to try and explain away a death during a police encounter, whether tasers are involved or not. They infamously even tried to do it after the killing of George Floyd. And it's worth knowing, from the beginning, this phrase had an ugly history. Its modern usage was coined in the 1980s by a guy named Charles Wheatley, a forensic pathologist in Miami, who blamed it for the mysterious deaths of more than a dozen black women. Wheatley began to publicise his theory, saying the women had died from combining sex with cocaine use, leading to excited delirium, and the autopsies had conclusively shown they had not been murdered. But you should know, the women's deaths were eventually attributed to a serial killer, and in some cases, according to the chief medical examiner, the signs of asphyxiation were so pronounced that one could see them from 10 feet away. It's that clear. So yeah, Wheatley's an idiot. A racist idiot, but a racist idiot who Axon retained as their expert witness in more than a dozen lawsuits. And in his expert opinion, Wheatley told juries he'd never seen a case where he could say that a taser actually contributed to the death. But hiring Wheatley is just part of it, because Axon and those it works closely with have gone to great lengths to familiarise police with the term excited delirium. At one point, one of the company's attorneys and an expert they funded started this group, which distributed a flyer explaining excited delirium with both recommended taser products to subdue people showing the symptoms and featured this helpful medical crisis mnemonic explaining all the signs of excited delirium with one of the I's standing for I can't breathe. And now, many officers are primed to blame excited delirium any time a death occurs during an encounter with the public. And when that death involves a taser, Axon can get heavily involved. Just listen to one former spokesman explain that to a reporter.
I spoke with a representative of the company. He told me that when he reads a news headline, something about death and tasers, he gets in touch with the local police department.
And I've got them pre-staged as a draft.
Yeah.
I literally just have to plug in the name of the city and say, dear so-and-so, I understand you may have had an arrest-related death. Here's my checklist. Here are some recommendations.
Wow. If he hears about a death involving tasers, he sends a pre-saved email with a checklist of what to do. And already, it's not a great sign that it's pre-saved. Just like it wouldn't be a great sign if every time you typed sorry in iMessage, the predictive text filled in for taking a massive shit in the middle of the Whole Foods parking lot. You're doing something very wrong if this kind of response is automatic. And as grim as that sounds in theory, it's worse in practice. Take the death of 18-year-old Israel Hernandez-Lack, who'd been spotted spray-painting the blackened windows of an abandoned McDonald's, got a single shot in the chest with a taser, collapsed on the sidewalk in cardiac arrest and died. Only 4 hours later, the Miami Beach PD received an email from the company featuring guidance on how investigators should proceed, including a sample press release and an evidence collection checklist. Axon even recommended a specific expert to contact for testing, and sure enough, that expert eventually returned a finding that the body had biomarkers consistent with excited delirium syndrome. And it doesn't even stop there. Axon's presence is even felt at the morgue, as the company sent hundreds of pamphlets a year to medical examiners explaining how to detect excited delirium. At one point, Axon was even filing lawsuits against medical examiners who'd attributed in-custody deaths in part to taser use, with one forensic pathologist saying, you literally get this letter threatening you if you say taser was the cause of death. And those threats got results. According to a 2011 survey, 14% of medical examiners said they modified diagnostic findings due to the possible threat of litigation, and 32% said that threat could affect future decisions. And when you take all of this together, the company's history of excitedly encouraging the use of its product while downplaying its risks and actively trying to suppress anything that might tarnish its reputation is just a recipe for disaster. And even some police officers who've gotten accustomed to using tasers can feel betrayed when they learn about all this. In Warren, Michigan, a 16-year-old died after being tased, and this officer on that force still seemed rattled after the fact.
Nobody told us that these tasers were going to kill people, you know? You come out with a sales pitch, you say this, and then when it doesn't work out, you just disappear. That's not right either. Because I'll tell you what, if I discharge pepper spray and it makes a guy go blind, I expect Guardian to come in and explain, because as far as I'm told, it doesn't make any go blind. I've never seen it. But if that were to happen, damn it, they better come in. That's not my fault. If I knew that about pepper spray, I wouldn't use it, you know? You swore this wasn't going to happen. You swore that this was a statistically normal thing, that these people were not dying at any more of a unusual rate than they would have with absent the taser, you know?
Right. I get why he's upset. Axon told him the taser was basically harmless, and the truth is, it's just not. It'd be like finding out that a Nerf gun was used to assassinate JFK. I don't care if Nerf says that was a statistical anomaly. I'm not handling it the same way anymore. So what can we do? Well, I admit, when it comes to tasers, it's complicated. I don't hate that there's at least a theoretical alternative to guns, and I guess I'd much rather police tase people than shoot them, although my ultimate preference would be for them to do neither of those and be much more aware of the actual risks involved. One way for us all to better know those risks would be to track taser usage far more closely than we currently do, which really doesn't seem like too much to ask. But beyond all that, I'd argue the term excited delirium should just be gone forever. And there's actually been some encouraging news on that front. In 2023, the National Association of Medical Examiners said it should not be listed as a cause of death. These states have now restricted the use of excited delirium, and New York and Hawaii currently have legislation to do that in the works, which is good. The point here is, we shouldn't keep using tasers like they're magic wands, because they're not. Or pretending deaths that occur after their use don't happen, because they do. And if Axon doesn't want to talk about this, then I will. But I'll do it in the most Axon way I know how. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me!